Hey gang, welcome to IS500, and in this video want to give you just a brief overview of where we're going. Practices of Christian vocation are the activities and actions we do to practice hearing the voice of God. Sometimes we get all worked up thinking of vocation as the job that we do or the task that we have, and then we approach God and say, give me the punch list, right? What are the 3, 4, 5, 6 things you want me to do? And then I'll go do it and I'll get the job done. And then we'll work on the next 5 or 6 or 7 things. But that's really not what vocation is about. Vocation is nurturing our relationship with God so that we can hear his voice because we know who he is. God's not like a boss or a taskmaster that we approach and get our list to do. It's much more like a relationship we have with our spouse, where we know what to do because we know our spouse so very well that we know what they want. And that's pretty subtle but significant. Sometimes we come to God and we say, I can't hear you. I have no idea what's going on. And I would submit for your consideration this next 10 weeks that perhaps the reason this happens is because we might be not spending enough time understanding probably 2 big categories. The first is the context that God has us in. What is it that God might be up to? What's actually going on in the world that we happen to live in? But the other thing is, how well do we really know God? And are we nurturing our relationship with God so we really truly understand him and what he's up to and what it means to think theologically deep about the context that we're actually in? That's actually called practical theology. The first part is really understanding why we do what we do and what are the influences for what we do. What are we even doing? But the next part is, what does it mean to think theologically deep about these things? What are people saying throughout history? What does God's word say? And not just what is our take on what God's word say, but what is the conversation around some of these biblical passages that we have experienced throughout history and have used to live faithfully before God throughout time. But the third is also, what are people contemporarily thinking about this? What are contemporary theologians considering and answering with some of the same questions that we have ourselves? So those 3 things come together. So what we end up having is this trajectory. We say, here's where the world's at or the culture's at, and this is what's actually going on. And then this is where God is at and what it means to think theologically deep. Ministry happens, though, not by just teaching everyone what it means to think the way God would like us to think on this situation, but inviting people to trust Jesus Christ with that kingdom trajectory. What is it the kingdom is asking of us, and how do we align our lives? How do we align our lives to that? That's where ministry programming is, that invitation to say, where are we currently and where do we need to get to be? Not merely preaching at people, but inviting them to greater levels of trust. How do we do that as pastors? Practices. We practice in every area of our lives, whether we know it or not. You don't just know how to drive a car, right? When you first learn how to drive a car, you get out with a parent or a teacher from maybe the high school, depending on what era you were in, and you go for a road trip, right? You go out on the road and you start driving around, and when you first get on the freeway, you have no idea what to pay attention to. Do you watch all the cars? Do you read every single sign, right? And it's total overload. And so as we practice learning how to drive, we start learning which cars we have to pay attention to, which cars are just going to go in our trajectory, what signs are important to watch, and what signs can we ignore. Same thing goes with our Christian walk. We can't merely just suddenly become discerners of God's word. We practice discernment over and over again. We don't simply become patient or overnight become great stewards. We practice the things that help us to become faithful stewards. And this is what this course is about. What are the spiritual practices that train our hearts into trusting God with our deepest human desires? I look forward to this next 10 weeks with you, and I hope it's a great one for you. All right? Talk to you soon.